From all across our world to the heart of our nation's capital, ABC This Week with Christiane Amanpour starts now.
Standing here outside the walls to Jerusalem's Old City, we witnessed some intense negotiations between Israeli and Palestinian leaders who have got down to the core issues, for instance, security and settlements, issues that have eluded their predecessors for more than 60 years. But looming over these talks is a deadline at the end of this month: Israel's self-imposed moratorium on building settlements. Now, publicly, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel cannot extend the moratorium. President Abbas of the Palestinians say that if he's forced to make any more concessions, he will simply walk. But will that be their final positions? After a meeting between Abbas, Netanyahu and Clinton, I asked whether they had made any progress towards breaking the impasse. Prime Minister Netanyahu told me, "We're working on it. It is a lot of work," he said. And the stakes couldn't be higher for the region, for the Obama administration and for Secretary Clinton, who says she's still optimistic despite a heavy dose of skepticism all round here. I sat with her after a hectic week of negotiating. Madam Secretary, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for being here in Jerusalem.
How are the talks going? Are you down beyond the sort of photo op stage? Are you into core issues?
We really are, Christiane, and I have to say it's been impressive to see the two leaders engage so seriously, so early on what are the core issues. But these talks are already into very sensitive and important areas.
President Obama has said that given the talks going in a constructive way, Israel should continue the moratorium on settlements. Do you believe that that will happen?
Well, that certainly is our hope. Now, we've also said that we'll support an agreement that is reached between the parties. It took a lot of political capital for Prime Minister Netanyahu to achieve this moratorium. It had never been done before, and I think, gave him credit for it about a year ago here in Jerusalem. At the same time, it's been in effect for the time that it was set for, and the talks are just starting. So we are working hard to make sure there remains a conducive atmosphere to constructive talks.
Is there any flexibility you can see, any creative diplomacy, as everybody's talking about, to get through this hurdle?
They need to keep talking, and each party, both Israelis and Palestinians, need to figure out a way to make that happen. And I think this president has said, we are committed, we will stay with you, we will do everything we can to facilitate that. At the end of the day, this has to be an agreement between Israelis and Palestinians.
Who do you think is making the biggest psychological leap, the biggest leap of heart?
I think both are. Israel today is under tremendous security pressure, and they can look over the horizon and see even more when you've got a country like Iran standing by saying, we want to wipe you from the face of the earth and annihilate you. I mean, that does concentrate your mind. And on the Palestinian side, we've been down this road. We're trying to build our own institutions of a new state. Can we really afford to not do it?
Is it the U.S. position to press President Abbas to stay, even if the moratorium is lifted?
We don't want either party to leave these negotiations or to do anything that causes the other to leave the negotiations.
But are you urging President Abbas to stay?
We are having very clear conversations with each, and I will certainly urge him to continue in the negotiations, just as I've urged Prime Minister Netanyahu and as President Obama has said, to continue the moratorium.
Do you believe you've convinced some of the skeptics, for instance, the Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who you also spoke to? Have you convinced him that this two-state solution, this process, is the right one?
I don't claim to convince someone whose views are very different from that position. I think that he and many Israelis are quite skeptical, just as many Palestinians are quite skeptical. But I asked them, what's the alternative? I mean, what is the alternative?
Can we move on to Iran? Can I first ask you, what is your reaction to the release of Sarah Shourd?
Great relief. I was so pleased that this young woman was able to come home. I want the other two young Americans, Josh and Shane, to come home as well. But as a mother, I've met with their mothers, and I just can't even imagine how painful the experience that they themselves have had inside prison, but then, of course, the pain that their families feel. So thankfully, she'll be given a chance to be reunited now.
Will there be any further talks at any time soon on the nuclear issue? Is there any date, any agreement from the Iranians to meet in a P5+1?
Well, we thought that they were open to that, and we certainly had indicated our readiness to meet. Now, at the United Nations next week, I will be meeting with my counterparts of the P5+1 to discuss where matters stand. But as we're speaking right now, I know of no meeting that the Iranians have agreed to attend.
On the one hand, you say that you're grateful that Iran released Sarah Shourd as a humanitarian gesture. You need to do diplomacy through the P5+1 on the nuclear issue. On the other hand, in your speech and in your comments at the Council on Foreign Relations, you said that it's a country morphing into a military dictatorship. Explain that.
Well, Christiane, I'm concerned about what I see going on. And I am, of course, grateful and appreciative that Sarah was released, and want to see not only her two compatriots, but other Americans who are held without cause released as well. And we are concerned about the nuclear program. But what we also see happening is increasing power exercised by the military, by the Revolutionary Guard, and by other militia and military entities. And I know that that's a concern of people inside Iran, as we read reports coming out of Iran. And it is something that would be even more distressing for the Iranian people. You know, I have grave disagreements with the Iranian Revolution, but the early advocates of it said this would be a republic. It would be an Islamic republic, but it would be a republic. Then we saw a very flawed election, and we've seen the elected officials turn to the military to enforce their power. And a lot of Iranians, even those who stayed, even those who were originally sympathetic, are starting to say, this is not what we signed up for. And I can only hope that there will be some effort inside Iran by responsible civil and religious leaders to, take hold of the apparatus of the state.
Let me ask you what the United States can do, as you say, to support the people of Iran. During the Cold War, as you know so well, the Helsinki Accords were the framework by which the United States pressed the Soviet Union on human rights while still negotiating on arms control.
Right.
Why is it the United States today does not have a framework or any sustained intention of pressing Iran on human rights while still trying to figure out the nuclear situation? We keep hearing that officials don't want to upset the diplomatic apple cart.
No, I don't think that's it at all. I mean, we have spoken out on human rights. We have done the best we could to support those inside through trying to open up access to telecommunications. So we are very much in favor of and speaking out on behalf of individual cases and more generally the human, political, civil rights of Iranians. And remember, when President Obama came into office, he extended his hand, very clearly and quite unprecedentedly to the Iranian leadership and said, we would be willing to have a diplomatic engagement with you. I think the sanctions that have been endorsed and now are being implemented by the international community, demonstrates our engagement because we've said to the Iranians all along, we have two tracks. We have the pressure track and we have the engagement diplomatic track. And we still remain open to that diplomacy. But it's been very clear that the Iranians don't want to engage with us. And the final point I would make is, we are trying to be effective as we help those inside Iran. We get, and I meet with Iranian experts, and we get different advice. We get some who say, full speed ahead, don't worry about it, just say whatever you have to say. Others who say, don't do that, this is a very delicate balance. So we try to walk that line.
Does it concern you that so many Iranians, after the election, so many of the protesters, really weren't sure whether the Obama administration was on their side, and to this day remain unsure, Iranians inside Iran?
Well, I don't know how that could be, because we made it very clear that we supported the legitimate efforts of the Iranian people to protest and demonstrate against a flawed election. We made it very clear to the Iranians that we thought that they had not only conducted an illegitimate election, but counter to their own stated and professed laws and constitution. So we made it very clear, but we also knew that the worst thing for those protesting was for them to be seen as stooges of the United States. So again, what we've tried to do is to stand up for the human rights of every person, most particularly those brave Iranians, lawyers and activists and others who are standing up and saying to the regime, no, you have to fulfill the promises you yourselves have made about what we should expect, without undermining their efforts. Now, it's very delicate, and some days we get it right, and some days maybe we could do better. But our bottom line is, we think the Iranian people deserve so much more than what they are now being given, and we are worried about the direction we see Iran headed.
The sanctions. President Ahmadinejad has said the sanctions are, quote, pathetic, worse than a used handkerchief. Do you think they have any possibility of actually affecting their nuclear behavior?
Well, first, I think they have and will continue to affect their behavior. In fact, former President Rafsanjani said just the other day, these are serious, they need to be taken seriously. He was in effect criticizing his government because of comments like that yes, they're biting, and we hear that from many in the region and beyond. And in fact, the information we're getting is that the Iranian regime is quite worried about the impact on their banking system, on their economic growth, because they've already encountered some tough economic times, and this is, making it more costly. Sanctions are a tool. They're not an end in themselves. And, we would very much like to see Iran return to the P5+1 forum, where they were last present a year ago, October, to talk about their nuclear program. We would like to see them once again permit full IAEA inspections. We would like to see them taking the offer that has been made by us and others to talk about a broad range of issues like their support for terrorism, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. So we stand ready to engage with Iran. And that's really the message that I would like to send to the Iranians, is that there's a way out of the sanctions, there's a way out of increasing opprobrium from the international community, and there should be a way out of this takeover of their political system and a threat to their dual system of elected and clerical leadership, because when you empower a military as much as they have to rely on them to put down legitimate protests and demonstrations, you create a momentum and unleash forces that you do not know where they will end up. And so we think that now is the time for the Iranian leadership to engage seriously.
Secretary Clinton, thank you very much for joining us.